change. But that public health one is missing. But there's still a very strong emphasis on public health. And
Nigel Edwards, I'm so sorry to interrupt you at this point. I do hope you can stay with us. We'll come back to you imminently. I do apologise because we must go to the High Court news on the BA strike. Emma Simpson, what's happening?
Yes, this long-running, bitter dispute between BA and Unite has taken a very dramatic turn indeed this morning here at the Court of Appeal. You can probably just see the Unite supporters outside the court there cheering because Unite has won its legal challenge. You may recall that on Monday, BA won an 11th-hour injunction here to halt the strike action, the judge ruling that the strike action was invalid on a technicality. Well, the Unite Union came back to court to launch a legal challenge. We've been waiting all morning for that result. And 3 Court of Appeal judges, including the 2 most senior judges in England and Wales, have ruled that Unite has won its appeal. Therefore, that means the injunction has been squashed and the expectation is that the strike action will resume. The question is when. Now, to find out a bit more about this, of course, we're still waiting for the exact reasons. We haven't got the judgment in writing yet. But let's go to Nadia Motraghi, who's an employment barrister and whose chambers has been involved in Unite's case. We weren't hearing about the ins and outs of this dispute in court. What did this all boil down to?
Well, the question here was whether or not Unite had reasonably communicated to its voters the results of the ballot, including whether or not it had communicated that there had been 11 spoilt ballot papers.
So this was a very technical point of law. So given this verdict, this judgment, what do you think the judges have come to a conclusion on about this?
Well, it is a very technical point, certainly. What I think is more important here is probably the significance of how the tide may be turning now in favour of the unions. We've had a number of judgments over the past 2 years which have emphasised the technical need to comply with the requirements, and this may indicate that the courts are now taking a different approach in favour of the right to strike.
Yes, this wasn't the first case of its kind to come to court, but a very important one. We had the 2 most senior judges in England and Wales, as I said, on this panel. What do you make about that?
Yeah, absolutely. And from what we know at the moment, we know that all 3 of them gave extended reasons for that judgment. That in itself is a significant point. So it's one that we'll need to pore over to work out the details of it. But for the time being, we can be, well, it's a very significant decision. There's no doubt about that.
For the Unite Union, they thought this was all about the fundamental right to strike, that that's what it boiled down to for them, even though it was a highly technical legal argument. Is that something you share?
Well, yes. I mean, there is a concern that's been put forward by Unite and other unions that the rules on balloting are so restrictive that such a technical breach could mean that industrial action is unlawful, and therefore that amounts to a failure to recognise and respect the right to freedom of association and the right to strike in particular, which is recognised both under the European Convention on Human Rights and in a number of other international obligations. So yes, there is a broader context to this which is very important for the unions and for the workers. No doubt, of course, BA is going to be bitterly disappointed with this, and we can expect that they'll be poring over the decision to see whether or not they should take this further.
Well, it's clear from the pictures outside the court how delighted the Unite Union is about this. There was so much at stake. But for the judges inside the court, they couldn't simply decide on a question of fairness. Again, it was all down to this legal technicality. But in the end, presumably, they came down on the balance that they had to take a more common sense view. Do you think that's what it's all about?
Well, that's very much likely to be the case. I mean, the irony is here that Section 231, which is the technical provision we're looking at, was actually enacted in order to protect the democratic legitimacy of the ballot, to protect the workers rather than to protect either the public or an employer. So the irony is that BA was the one who was relying on this section, which wasn't there to protect them in the first place.
And that's something that employers have increasingly been doing in recent years.
Well, of course, I mean, employers are going to be combing through decisions to look for any possible technical breach, and there has been an increasing willingness for the courts to say that is grounds for an injunction because the action may be unlawful. But this, again, it may be that indicates the tide is turning and that judges are not so sympathetic towards these technical arguments.
Can we go as far to say that this sets a precedent now?
Well, the circumstances in which precedent operates are very narrow. Certainly, if a case came on under the same subsection and very similar facts, it may well be binding. But it's more likely to be either persuasive or at least to indicate a new approach rather than to have strict precedential value. But we'll have to wait to see. I haven't yet pored over the judgment myself.
And, of course, this case is being watched very closely by people like yourselves. This was a very significant case, a very significant hearing.
Yes, absolutely. And I think, no doubt, because of the tough economic times in which we find ourselves, there's likely to be an increasing desire on the part of employers to challenge industrial action that's intended to be taken by its workers. So, yes, for that reason also, its lawyers will no doubt be looking at this very closely.
Stakes are high, Nadia, on both sides. As I say, your chambers was helping to represent Unite in this case. There was an awful lot riding on it for Unite. What would have been the avenues for Unite if they had failed in this appeal?
Certainly. Well, I should say that the fact that individuals involved in the case are in my chambers makes no difference. We're frequently against each other and indeed in front of judges from our own chambers or others. But in terms of Unite's options, if it hadn't been successful, well, one is it could have appealed to the Supreme Court. The second is that it could have put in an application to the European Court of Human Rights, which has a growing jurisprudence on Article 11, namely right to freedom of association, which includes the right to strike, as looking at whether or not our statutory regime here in the UK is compliant with the international obligations providing for the right to strike.
Nadia Motraghi, thanks very much for that view on what's gone on in the Court of Appeal today and the significance of it. Thank you very much indeed. And as I say, a very dramatic turn of events here. You can probably just see the Unite workers standing outside the court here, waiting to speak to their representatives. Derek Simpson, the Joint General Secretary of the Unite Union, has been inside the court today. We'll all be interested to hear what he's got to say with this judgment. But for now, to summarise the outcome here, the Unite Union has won its legal challenge that this dramatic injunction has been overturned, and the expectation is that the strike will be back on. The question is when.
Well, Emma, thanks very much for bringing us that breaking news. We're going to be back with you in just a second or two. I know you're going to speak to some of those people there who we're seeing centre screen. Obviously, we are waiting also for reaction from the union and also from BA themselves. But as Emma was taking us through, two of the three judges allowing that appeal brought by Unite, and that means the strike is back on. We now await to find out exactly when that strike action will actually take place.
Yes, because the point is, of course, that BA cabin crew, under the original plans, should be on strike as we speak. This should be the period of the first of 4 BA strikes. They should have gone out a couple of days ago, and the strike due to continue and through till Saturday. There are then 3 further sets of dates not ending until the 9th of June, and that, of course, a relevant date because it ties in with the World Cup in South Africa, of course, and that's partly to do with the timing of that. And so we wait to see, simply logistically, what happens now. Now, even had the strikes gone ahead on the day they were due to begin, a couple of days ago, you'll remember that it is Heathrow, above all other airports, that are largely affected by this, and BA was adamant that it had good contingencies in operation. It said even if the strike had gone ahead in its planned fashion, it was still aiming to run more than 60% of its long-haul services out of Heathrow, and lots of other airports weren't affected at all. Of course, Gatwick, for example, London City, other major BA hubs, they weren't affected at all by the strike. And BA was sounding confident that it could run more than 60% of its long-haul flights and a little less of its short-haul flights. It does tend to prioritise the longer-haul flights at a time like this. We wait to see, of course, logistically, what happens now. Will cabin crew start striking again imminently? We really need to hear from BA and see what it believes is going to happen and what that means for passengers.
And of course you've had this parallel set of events going on with this particular industrial dispute. You've had these events at the High Court with this injunction from BA to stop that industrial action and the strike action. And all the while, of course, the two sides have also been trying to resolve the key issues in dispute. And of course they've been at ACAS at the start of the week. They also saw the new Transport Secretary. But of course the key parts of this dispute, the numbers of cabin crew, that was the original dispute, they still to be resolved. Progress, if you listen to Unite on that central issue, but then of course they were talking about travel concessions and disciplinary action. Well, they're coming out now, the union team, so let's put the sound up and hear reaction.